very much. The government is going to move in a Satyam-like manner to deal with IL&FS. Should that make markets and should that make stakeholders breathe a sigh of relief?
Hello? I'm not on it. Hello?
Okay, I'll say you take over. I don't think
Right, Supriya, in fact, Abizer Diwanji, if you can hear me, Tanveer here in the studios. Supriya just broke the story about how the government is now going to step in to help IL&FS. This was pretty much something that the street was expecting as the next move too, given the board meet and the discussions that happened over the weekend. What's your take on the story now? Where does it go from here?
My take is I don't know in what form the government needs to interfere because Satyam was a clear case where the company was in a governance kind of a problem where the owner or the promoter of the company himself came about and owned up to the fact that there was an issue. In IL&FS's case, I think it's a liquidity mismatch which can be resolved through a reorganization of the company, i.e. sale of a few assets, infusion of fresh capital, and frankly waiting it out such that the liquidity issue sorts itself out. So I think the government may come in only from a governance point of view if at all it has to. But otherwise, I think the shareholders will do the needful by pumping in the required capital to bridge the liquidity gap.
But Abizer, in a time like this, you know, when there is talk that IL&FS is too big to fail, the government needs to now intervene. What Supriya is picking up from her sources is that it could very well be a rescue like what was in the case of Satyam. So perhaps IL&FS could be broken down, each individual company, engineering, transport, education, what have you, individually, and there could be a bidding war. Do you not think that would at least arrest and make the markets a little happy? Because, you know, there is this whole fear about IL&FS becoming a contagion issue, and that's really spooking the market right now.
No, but IL&FS is not a situation where a company can fail. Because as I said again, it's a liquidity issue. It's a CIC for all you know. It's a holder of 24 infrastructure companies. It's a holder of one financial services company. So technically, I think what will be required is a reorganization, possibly under Section 230 of the Companies Act. And what will happen is that there will be a protection of some kind where creditors will delay some payments for some time. There will be some of it will be through a infusion of capital. But ultimately, I don't see a situation where an organization will fail as in break down and collapse because it has hard assets which is yielding revenues. It is not a services company like a Satyam or another bank maybe where depositors would lose interest, or in Satyam the software companies would take away the contracts and hence the enterprise value would collapse. Here we have 24 hard assets and I don't know how many more projects or joint ventures. So I don't think this is akin to a services company which can collapse.
So, Abizer, given that logic, what do you think is the trigger? Why is the government in panic mode of sorts and wants to move on this? And this is not information that we're picking up from a bureaucrat or somebody in finance. This is information that's coming in from the PMO. So I'm just curious to understand, why do you believe the government is moving on this? Is the contagion perhaps something that's scaring them in terms of the NBFCs and how the markets have reacted to this? I'm just curious to understand, because a Satyam-like operation, and this is what I've been told, a Satyam-like operation will entail a lot of effort.
So two aspects that I can think of. One is to assure the markets that there is coercive action being taken to resolve the issue. I think the fact that this is spread to a lot of NBFCs is a bit of a market overreaction, and the government's assurance to back IL&FS only confirms that it may not allow to spread that further. So it's the news more than the IL&FS itself which is an issue. Secondly, I think there is possibly a need to bring in better governance, because there clearly was a problem for a long time which is only manifested now. And given that LIC now, which is a government organization, becomes the largest shareholder, the government may want to play a much bigger role from a governance point of view. That is what will happen, I think, because if you realize policyholders' money is going into these organizations, IL&FS, for example, IDBI, for example. So there is a conscious governance effort that the government has put in, which may be Satyam-like, which was fantastic if you realize, with the likes of Deepak Parekh, etc., coming on the board. If something like this happens, I think it's very good for these organizations.
So it's good for the governance issue, but is this going to soothe frayed nerves in the markets, you believe, eventually? There is a huge liquidity scare as far as the NBFCs are concerned, even though the government hasn't spoken about a special window and all of that for the NBFCs. Is this going to be enough to arrest, to somehow communicate to the markets that the government is in control?
Yeah, no, so what the government is trying to do is trying to step in to say that let the contagion effect not spread. So the bigger problem is the liquidity will dry up for the other NBFCs. For example, we saw the effect on DHFL, for example. What the government doesn't want is those kind of impacts to happen on the larger organizations. Unfortunately, that has nothing to do with an IL&FS standalone. IL&FS standalone is subject to a revival plan, which I think has been now announced. And given that it's hard assets and a liquidity mismatch, with capital infusion, that's a solvable problem. And the government wants to communicate to the market that this is standalone and has no implication on the rest of the NBFC sector.